In today's photo shoot, we are celebrating Halloween. We're going to use DIY styling with a creative in-camera technique for a ghostly effect. Hey everybody, Lindsay Adler here, and happy Halloween. Every Halloween, I love to create holiday thematic images. Things where I combine something that feels fashion or beauty with something that's a little bit creepy. And that's exactly what we're going to do today. Now, I wanted to play around with some DIY and creative in-camera techniques. And so it began with our styling. I was talking with my creative team and we wanted to do something that had a little bit of a mummy feel, but we wanted to do it on a budget. So we grabbed pantyhose and wrapped it around her head. We frayed them, and I can take no credit for this. This was my wonderful creative team giving me this beautiful look. And also what gives it that fashion feel is beautiful model, beautiful makeup. So now I have kind of a mummy-inspired beauty look in front of me, but I wanted it to have another layer of creepiness to it. And so what we're going to do is a creative in-camera technique called shutter drag. We're going to use shutter drag in order to create these ghostly, spiritual looking streaks coming out from our model, done through a mix of strobe and continuous light. All right, so I want to start at the beginning, and I'm going to build the lights in one by one to show you exactly how I achieve this technique. All right, so we're going to begin with our main light, and this is going to be a strobe. This is what freezes part of the model in place. I am using a Profoto Pro D3, and on it, a beauty dish with a grid. This is going to give us nice illumination to the subject's face, show a little bit of texture on the bandages, and that is going to be our first light. But that's not what gives us the creative technique. So let's begin there. With this first image, it's pretty as it is, especially with the black background. It's like she's emerging from the darkness, and I could color grade this to be pretty. So this could be a fine Halloween image. But I like to have Halloween and holiday images that feel a little bit more like my style, have a little bit more interest, maybe movement to them. So that's where I'm going to start with our next creative technique. Now, by the way, right now, I am shooting at 1/200th of a second, f11 ISO 100. This is going to be important because these settings are going to change in order to accommodate the next step of the process, which is adding continuous lights. By adding continuous lights to the scene, what we're going to be able to do is freeze the subject's face in place with the strobe. Then use a long shutter speed, move my camera or move my subject, and create ghostly blurs. So what I'm going to do is add both of my continuous lights. I'm using a combination of Nanlite Pavotubes. I have a 4-foot Pavotube as well as a 2-foot. Now the colors of these, I could go with a variety of different approaches, but I'm going to go with cool tones. All right, so let me turn on those Pavotubes and show you the different effect that we're achieving. With both of these continuous lights, you can see very little change. I mean, on the shadow side of her face, you see a little bit of blue, but it's definitely not ghostly. It's definitely not bright. And that's because my camera settings are not accounting for allowing continuous light to show up. Right now, my camera settings are set for the strobe. So what I need to do is I need to do something to allow continuous light to show up more, which in this case, for my creative effect, is going to be a long shutter speed. When I vary my shutter speed, so I go from 1/200th of a second to say a 20th of a second, a 10th of a second, a 5th of a second, what that'll do is it'll allow the continuous lights over time to register in the exposure, but it does not affect the exposure of the strobe. And by the way, if this is a new concept to you, it's the same idea as on location, mixing strobe and ambient light together. It's the same idea. Okay, so let me just show you what it looked like now if I do a little bit of what's called a shutter drag. I'm going to take a shot at a 30th of a second, a 10th of a second, and a 5th of a second. In each one of these shots, as my shutter speed gets slower, these continuous lights get brighter and brighter. And this is going to be good for the final effect that I try, but there's one other thing that's going to cause us a problem and I need to address now. The continuous light of the modeling light is actually showing up on her face. You can see it get brighter and brighter. And so when I add the movement to the shot, the entire frame would be blurry if I don't turn off this modeling light. So I'm going to do that right now and show you the difference at 1/5 of a second. Let's compare these two shots. Now in the first image at 1/5 of a second, I have the modeling light of the beauty dish on still. You can see how overexposed she is, how blurry the image is. But in the second shot, I've turned off the modeling light. And so you can see the strobe is relatively freezing her, but now it's no longer overexposed. So I'm seeing a lot more of the color from those two Pavotubes. Now this is already looking a little bit ghostly, almost like she's glowing from within, but there's a lot more I can do with this creative shutter drag. So the next part of the equation is I can add motion. I can move my subject, maybe having her shake her head or move back and forth. I can move my camera. And as I do so, you're going to see more dramatic streaks. For example, if I want it to look like a ghost or a spirit is coming out from within her, I can quickly shift my camera and hold it in place, and you'll actually see a secondary face. From when I move my camera, the exposure continues illuminating her. Or I can have her move, shake back and forth, and it'll actually look like a ghost is trying to come out of her skin. Each one of these adjustments is going to create a different result. And this is where it's important to note, like so many things in photography, it is an art, not a science. In other words, I take a lot of shots and I try a lot of different techniques, and each one does something a little bit different. So let me do one where I move my camera to show you, and I'm going to do another where I have her move. That's perfect. And hold still for me. And then now, can you look straight at me and just wiggle your, like go back and forth with your head. So in this first shot, you can see that I have the subject's face and then a ghosting behind her. What I did is I quickly shifted my camera to the left-hand side of the frame. Then in the secondary images, I had her move her head back and forth, and you can see that it creates a little bit of ghosting on her face itself. So these were just two techniques, but really I like to play around and try a lot of different things. Now, when I introduce motion, frequently what I need to do is add just a little bit more clarity and contrast to make sure the frozen parts of the face do look crisp. So for example, I'm here in Capture One, and I've been shooting tethered this entire time using a Tether Tools tether cable. Here, what I like to do is come in and add a little contrast, maybe a little bit of clarity, and you can see the difference that that makes already. Just because I've been adding motion, it looked a little bit flat. And then of course I can come in and I can play around with color. Like I could go to color balance, and in the shadows, add a little bit more blue, for example. Or if I wanted to create contrast, I could go into the highlights and warm them up, or I could lean into that color and add cyan. So my creative process is from the concept, for example, the makeup and the head wrap, to the lighting, to the post-processing, all of it working together. So when I find a color grade and a contrast that I like, I then am going to copy those effects and apply them back down so that all the images that come in will have that technique. I love to shoot tethered because then I can shoot a ton of different shots of motion and not know if I've gotten it. It's hard to review it unless I can go back, look at my images that I've shot, and I can kind of scroll through them and see if we got the shot. Or maybe I'm trying a bunch of different techniques. I don't know which ones are really working. I can come back and reference it and see where I want to focus more time. All right, so I do think I have a lot of beautiful things to work with, but one thing I do recommend as far as technique is that you have a zoom lens. I'm shooting with the Canon R5 and the Canon RF 24-105 lens. Now the reason I like zoom is because it gives you another variable. Instead of just the model moving back and forth or the camera moving back and forth, I can also zoom, and that's going to give me another creative effect for shutter drag. Now, by the way, I have several videos where I use shutter drag, sometimes for beauty photography, others for fashion shoots, and I have some links in the description below that show you some of these other videos, so you can see other applications of this technique. All right, so with that, it's going to be a lot of experimentation with both the model and moving my camera. So there you have it, beauty image that's creepy, it's Halloween inspired using DIY styling as well as creative in-camera techniques. Now, if you want to see the gear used in the making of these images, be sure to check out the links in the description below and visit Adorama.com. And if you want to see more about shutter drag or more of my creative Halloween images, you can see those links in the description as well. All right, guys, I hope these have inspired you, and I can't wait to see if you try a little bit of this ghostly effect yourself. See you next time.